The name at the bottom of the stack stopped her cold. Claire Bennett had spent the better part of that morning moving through a pile of janitor applications without looking up once. 43 of them, all unremarkable, all forgettable, each one blending into the next the way paperwork does when the job behind it requires nothing more than a pulse and a willingness to show up before dawn. But that name. She read it twice, then a third time, as if repetition might undo what was printed on the page. Owen Carter. She set the folder down on her desk and stood very still for a moment, the way a person stands when something from a long time ago reaches forward and touches them without warning. Then she picked up the folder, walked out of her office, crossed the executive floor, took the elevator down to the lobby, and found him sitting in one of the plastic chairs along the far wall of the reception area. He was not checking his phone. He was not fidgeting. He simply sat there with his hands resting on his knees, looking straight ahead with the calm of someone who had long stopped expecting much from waiting rooms. There was a child in his lap. A girl, maybe 7, curled against his chest with her face turned into the collar of his jacket, sound asleep. Owen held her with one arm, steady and practiced, the kind of hold that came from years of carrying a child who had fallen asleep in places that were never designed for sleeping. His other hand rested on the armrest, motionless, as though he had arranged his entire body around the single priority of not waking her. Claire stood there for a moment longer than she intended. Then she said his name. He looked up. There was no recognition in his face. None. He looked at her the way any applicant looks at any executive who has just said their name out loud in a waiting room, with the polite, slightly guarded attention of a man who understands that he is being evaluated and has decided to let the evaluation happen without performing for it. "Owen Carter?" she said again. "Yes," he said. Just the word. Nothing attached to it. He had no idea who she was. She brought him into her office. Not the standard interview room on the second floor with the rectangular table and the motivational poster that no one had ever been motivated by, but her actual office on the 14th floor. The one with the view of the city and the desk that cost more than most people's cars. She held the door for him as he came in, the girl still asleep against his shoulder. And then she closed it behind them and locked it. The sound of the lock was small, barely audible, but Owen registered it. He looked at her. She looked at him. "It's you," she said. It was not a question. It was not an accusation. It was the sound of a person confronting something they had been carrying for a very long time. A name, a reputation, a question that had never been answered, and finding it standing in front of them in a jacket that had seen too many winters, holding a sleeping child, applying to mop floors. Claire had entered the university 3 years after Owen Carter had left it. By the time she walked through the doors of the mathematics building as a nervous freshman, Owen was already gone. But his name was not. Professors mentioned him the way people mention weather events, casually, inevitably, as though his presence had been a natural phenomenon rather than a human one. The story that circulated most often was about a proof. A visiting lecturer from MIT had presented a problem that had resisted formal solution for 11 years. Owen had attended as an undergraduate, listened, asked one question, gone back to his dorm, and returned the next morning with a proof on 4 pages of notebook paper. The visiting lecturer stared at it for 20 minutes and asked Owen if he understood what he had done. Owen said he thought so. The proof was published before he finished his junior year. He was the kind of mind that made difficult things look gentle, as though he was simply reading something the rest of the room had not learned to see yet. Then he vanished. No forwarding address, no LinkedIn profile, no conference appearances. Gone the way people are gone when life takes a turn that does not leave room for the things they were supposed to become. Claire had carried that name for years. Not obsessively, but with the attention you give to an unanswered question. She had built her own company, grown it to 4,000 employees, and never stopped wondering what had happened to Owen Carter. Now here he was, 42 years old, applying to mop her floors. She opened the folder on her desk. His application was filled out in clean, even handwriting. Under previous employment, warehouse work, night shift inventory, a cleaning company 2 cities over. Under education, Bachelor of Science, Mathematics, no GPA listed, though she knew from the stories it was the kind that made department chairs take notice. Under emergency contact, a single name. Lily Carter, his daughter. No second name, no partner, no parent, no sibling. Just the girl sleeping on his shoulder. Claire looked at that for a moment. One name. One person in the world he had listed as someone to call if something went wrong. The HR team flagged your file, she said. She kept her voice even, professional, because the alternative was to sound like what she actually was. A person who was struggling to reconcile 2 completely different versions of the same man. They felt your qualifications were, in their words, excessive for the position. Owen nodded as though this was not news. I figured they might, he said. I wasn't sure if it would get past the first screening. It almost didn't. She closed the folder. Why this position, Owen? Why janitor? The girl stirred against his chest. Her eyes opened, slow and unfocused, and she looked around the office with the disoriented calm of a child who was used to waking up in unfamiliar places. Baba, she murmured. Not dad. Not daddy. Baba, a word that belonged to some earlier, softer language of their household, carried forward into English the way certain words survive, because no translation quite captures them. Burasmem? Owen smoothed her hair with one hand, a gesture so practiced it was almost invisible. Not yet, sweetheart, he whispered. Just a little longer. He adjusted her against his shoulder, and she settled back down, not fully asleep but content to wait. Claire watched this happen. She watched the way his hand moved across the girl's hair, the way his voice dropped to something she had never heard in any boardroom or conference call, the way his entire body reorganized itself around this small person without any visible effort. Something behind her professional mask shifted. Not broke, shifted, the way a wall shifts when the foundation beneath it moves just enough to let in a crack of something you were not expecting to feel. Owen looked at her. He answered the question she had asked before the girl woke up, as though the interruption had simply been a pause in a sentence he was still finishing. Her school is 3 blocks from this building, he said. I need to leave by 3 every day. This position allows that. He said it without apology, without the defensive edge that sometimes came with a man who expected to be argued with. It was just a fact. His daughter's school was 3 blocks away. He needed to be there when she came out. Everything else, the career he could have had, the mind that could have changed a field, the trajectory that professors still talked about in hallways, all of it had been weighed against a 7-year-old girl's need to see her father waiting at the school gate at 3 o'clock. And the girl had won. Claire sat with that for a moment. She was not easily moved. But something about the way Owen Carter said 3 o'clock reached past her professional instincts and landed somewhere more human. There's a position in data analysis, she said. Entry level, but closer to what you actually know. 3 times the pay. I can move your file over quietly. Something moved across his face. I appreciate that, he said. But if overtime comes up and I can't be flexible, my daughter waits. I can't take that risk. He said it without drama. He was just a man who had done the math on his own life and arrived at an answer that left no room for variables he could not control. I'd like to take the janitor job, if it's still available. Claire told him it was. She told HR to process the paperwork that afternoon. Owen started the following Monday. He came in before the building opened. The overnight security guard, a man named Terrence, mentioned it without thinking much of it. The new janitor was already there when he arrived to clock out, moving through the lobby with a mop like he had nowhere else to be. Calm guy, Terrence said. Doesn't talk much. Always nods when you pass him. But Terrence also noticed the other thing. Every day, at exactly 2:55, Owen parked his cart, removed his gloves, and walked out the front entrance. Never late, never early. Never seen anyone keep a clock like that, Terrence said. By the end of the first week, Owen had rearranged the supply closet on the fourth floor in a way that cut restocking time nearly in half. No one asked him to do it. The building manager noticed and mentioned it to facilities, who mentioned it to no one in particular. It was the kind of improvement that made things run better without drawing attention to the person who made it happen. During his lunch break on Wednesday, Sandra Martinez, the ground floor receptionist, passed by the supply room and saw Owen sitting on an overturned bucket with 2 lunch bags on his cart. One was his. The other was smaller, bright purple, a child's bag. He was tucking a folded note into it, written in his clean, even hand. A note for his daughter. He packed the small bag, zipped it shut, and set it on the shelf beside his thermos, where it would wait until 2:55. Sandra said nothing. She understood it was not meant to be a story for other people. But not everyone in the building was inclined to leave Owen Carter alone. The operations floor was managed by a man named Greg Dalton, who had been with the company long enough to confuse seniority with authority. Dalton was the kind of manager who spoke loudly in open spaces and addressed people he considered beneath him with a tone that was not quite insulting, but close enough that you always felt the intention behind it. Within Owen's first 2 weeks, Dalton had called him back 3 times to redo floors that did not need redoing. He had interrupted Owen mid-task in front of junior employees to point out a missed corner that had not been missed. He had complained about the cleaning solution, loudly, while others watched. Owen took all of it without visible reaction. He listened, nodded, and went back to work. He did not complain to HR. He simply absorbed it and moved on the way water moves around a stone. Then came the day Dalton found a new angle. It was a Tuesday afternoon. Owen was finishing the east corridor on the 3rd floor, working with the unhurried precision that characterized everything he did. Dalton appeared at the end of the hallway with 2 junior account managers trailing behind him, the kind of audience he preferred when he wanted his voice to carry. "Carter," Dalton said. He said the name the way you say the name of something you have decided is beneath your attention but are going to address anyway. "Someone want to explain to me why our custodial staff clocks out at 3 every day? Is this a part-time gig I wasn't told about?" He paused. "Or are we running a babysitting service now?" The 2 account managers behind him shifted uncomfortably. Neither of them laughed, which was to their credit, but neither of them said anything, which was not. Owen looked at Dalton. There was no slump in his shoulders, no tension in his jaw, no flash of anger in his eyes. He simply looked at the man the way you look at weather, something that is happening around you, something you cannot control and have decided not to waste energy reacting to. He picked up his mop. He turned back to the floor. He said nothing. Dalton stood there for a moment, thrown slightly by the absence of a reaction, the way a person is thrown when they swing at something and connect with air. Then he straightened his jacket and walked away. Claire witnessed a different exchange 3 days later. She had come down to the operations floor to check on a server installation and was passing through when she heard Dalton's voice raised just enough to carry. She stopped. Owen stood with a mop handle in his hands, listening to Dalton explain, slowly and with exaggerated patience, that a professional would have noticed the scuff mark near the elevator doors before being told. Around them, 3 employees pretended to be absorbed in their screens. Owen looked at the scuff mark. He nodded once, said he would take care of it, turned back toward the elevator. There was no slump, no tension, nothing. He simply went back to work as though the last 2 minutes had not happened. Dalton caught Claire's eye from across the room. He had the brief, slightly uncertain look of a man who had just realized he had an audience he had not accounted for. Then he straightened up and walked back to his office. Claire said nothing. Not that day. She walked back to the elevator and rode it up to her office in silence. She sat at her desk and looked at the city through the window for a long time. She was thinking about the particular mathematics of power, the kind they don't teach in any classroom, the kind where a man with authority uses it to diminish a man without any, and the man without any absorbs it and keeps working, Not because he is weak, but because he has a daughter to pick up at 3 and cannot afford the luxury of confrontation. She filed it away, along with the 3 o'clock detail, in the part of her mind that kept track of things that required attention. And she began, without fully realizing it, to prepare for the moment when the file would be thick enough to act on. Eventually, the weeks settled into a routine. Owen moved through the building like a fixed point. Always present, always working, always exactly where he was supposed to be. Sandra started leaving a cup of coffee on the utility cart near his supply closet every morning without explanation. Owen would find it there and drink it and leave the empty cup where she could find it. Nothing was ever said about it. It was simply a thing that happened. Claire found herself watching him sometimes, not with the purpose of a CEO monitoring performance, but with the particular attention you give to something you are trying to understand. He was not performing contentment. That was what struck her most. She had seen people perform contentment, had done it herself in board meetings and investor calls, projecting a steadiness she did not always feel. Owen's calm was not a performance. It was just what he was, at whatever this point in his life had become. Then one afternoon, just before 3, Claire was crossing the lobby on her way to a meeting when she saw Owen come through the service corridor, gloveless, his cart already parked, his jacket already on. The front doors opened. A girl ran in. She was small and fast, and had the particular urgency of a child who had been waiting for exactly this moment all day. She crossed the lobby at full speed and launched herself at Owen, who caught her and lifted her in one motion, the kind of catch that was equal parts reflex and ritual. And Owen Carter smiled, not the polite, restrained expression Claire had seen him offer to colleagues who nodded at him in hallways. This was different. This was the full, unguarded, completely open smile of a man who had been waiting for exactly this moment all day too. Claire had never seen it before. In the weeks Owen had worked in her building, she had never once seen him smile. Not when Sandra left coffee. Not when the security guard nodded. Not when he solved the supply closet problem. His face in the building was steady, calm, composed. The face of a man who had made his peace with something and did not need the world to know what it cost. But here, with this girl in his arms, the cost was briefly invisible, and what was underneath it was something Claire had no professional framework for. She stood in the lobby and watched them walk out through the glass doors, the girl talking fast about something that had happened at school, Owen listening with his head tilted down toward her, carrying her bag in one hand and holding her hand with the other. At the sidewalk, the girl stopped talking and looked up at him. She said something Claire could not hear through the glass. Owen crouched down to her level and said something back, and the girl wrapped her arms around his neck and held on for a moment longer than a routine hug. Then they stood up together and walked down the street, and Claire watched them until they turned the corner and were gone. She did not go to her meeting. She went back to her office, sat at her desk, and opened her laptop. She typed Owen Carter into a search engine with the particular focus of a person who has decided that a question they have been carrying for years is no longer optional. The results came up quickly. 2 published papers, both from his undergraduate years. The first was the proof, the one the professors had talked about, the 11-year problem solved on 4 pages of notebook paper. The second was a co-authored piece on optimization theory that had been cited in 14 subsequent publications. Then a conference listing from 12 years ago, his name on a panel that he appeared to have never actually attended. And then nothing. The trail went cold the way trails go cold when a person stops being visible to the systems that track visibility. No graduate program, no faculty page, no professional profile, no obituary either, which meant he was alive, just absent from every structure that would have made his life legible to someone looking for him. Claire sat at her desk for a long time. The city moved outside her window, indifferent and continuous. What happened to you, Owen Carter? She closed the laptop. She did not have the answer yet. But the question had shifted from curiosity to something closer to obligation. A few days later, around 10 to 3, Claire was leaving a conference call early when she found Owen in the corridor near the service elevator. He was finishing the last section of floor before his departure, working with the same unhurried precision he always had, but she could see him glance at his watch. 8 minutes to 3. She stopped. "Are you all right?" she asked. She was not sure exactly what she meant by it, whether she meant today or in general or across the whole silent span of years that sat between the man the professors had described and the man standing in front of her with a mop. Owen looked at her. He glanced at his watch again. Not impatiently, not rudely, just with the awareness of a man who had a non-negotiable appointment in 8 minutes and was calculating whether this conversation would fit inside that window. "Yeah," he said. "I'm all right." He said it simply. No performance, no deflection. Then he rinsed the mop, parked the cart, and headed for the lobby. 3 o'clock. Claire stood in the empty corridor for a moment after he was gone. She understood something then, not about Owen specifically, but about the shape of his life. He was not racing against a deadline. He was not stressed about a meeting. He was accountable to a 7-year-old girl who expected to see her father at the school gate at 3 o'clock. And that accountability was absolute in a way that no board meeting, no investor call, no quarterly target had ever been absolute for Claire. It was not a prison, it was a compass. That evening, Claire sat at her desk long after the building had emptied. She opened her laptop and typed Owen Carter into a search engine. The results came quickly. 2 published papers from his undergraduate years, the 11-year proof, and a co-authored piece on optimization theory that had been cited 14 times since. A conference listing from 12 years ago, his name on a panel he appeared to have never attended. And then nothing. The trail went cold the way trails go cold when a person stops being visible to the systems that track visibility. No graduate program. No faculty page. No professional profile. Just a man who had produced 2 brilliant pieces of work before he was 22 and then disappeared into a silence so complete it looked deliberate. Claire closed the laptop. The city moved outside her window, indifferent and continuous. "What happened to you, Owen Carter?" The question had shifted from curiosity to something closer to obligation. The crisis came on a Thursday. A flag in the monitoring system at 6 in the morning, dismissed as routine. By 9, it had spread into the core processing layer of the flagship logistics algorithm. By 11, the engineering leads were in the main conference room on the 7th floor with their laptops open and their faces arranged in the expression that meant things were worse than they were saying. Claire listened to the technical director, Marcus Webb, explain that the algorithm governing distribution for 3 of their largest clients had developed a cascading error. If they did not find and correct the underlying formula within hours, the system would generate incorrect routing data, and at that scale, that meant hundreds of millions in contractual liability. Webb's team had been working since 7. They had found where the error expressed itself, but not where it originated. The whiteboard was covered in notation. 3 colored markers tracing 3 failed approaches. Owen came in at 11:40. He was not supposed to be there. He was cleaning the hallway outside, part of his Thursday rotation. The door had been propped open, and he had worked his way down the hall until he stood in the doorframe, about to move the chair and shut the door so he could finish the floor. He did not move the chair. He looked at the whiteboard. No one noticed him at first. Owen stood still for perhaps 90 seconds, long enough for Claire to register him and look up. He was not reading the board the way a curious passerby reads something unfamiliar. He was reading it the way you read something you recognize. Claire watched him. Owen turned and found her eyes without searching. There was a question in his expression, the look of a man who had seen something and was deciding whether saying so was his place. She gave him the smallest nod she could manage. He crossed to the whiteboard. He picked up a black marker from the tray, found a clear section of board near the bottom right corner, and wrote. He did not write slowly or with the performance of someone demonstrating intelligence. He wrote the way you write, when the answer is already formed and the hand is simply catching up to the mind. 7 lines of calculation, clean and tight, ending in a single bracketed expression that isolated the failure point in the optimization sequence. Then he set the marker down and stepped back. Webb was still on the phone. One of the junior engineers, a young man named Ryan Briggs, who had been with the company for less than a year and had not yet developed the professional habit of disguising his reactions, looked at the board and said, out loud, without thinking, "Who wrote that?" The room turned. Webb ended his call. Someone produced a short, uncomfortable laugh because the man standing next to the whiteboard was wearing a gray uniform with a company logo on the chest and had a mop cart parked near the door. "I might be wrong," Owen said. He said it simply, without deflection, in the same tone he might use to say he had noticed the soap dispenser on the 3rd floor was running low. "But if the error's in the waiting function, that's where I'd look." The room went quiet in the particular way that rooms go quiet when something has just happened that no one has a script for. Webb walked to the board. He stood in front of Owen's 7 lines for a long time. He took out his phone and ran something through it. His expression moved through several stages: skepticism, attention, recognition, and then the very specific look of a man who has just watched someone walk up to a locked door and open it without a key. "Run it," Webb said to the room. He was not looking at Owen when he said it. He was still looking at the board. The engineers ran it. 11 minutes later, the error flag cleared. The algorithm resumed normal function. The cascading failure stopped. No one said anything to Owen directly. He retrieved his cart, finished the hallway, and moved on. By the time the room reorganized around relief, he was 2 floors down, mopping in silence, checking his watch. 12:37. 2 hours and 18 minutes until the school gate. Claire found him that afternoon near the service elevator on the 5th floor. She did not lead with what had happened in the conference room. She let it sit between them for a moment before she said anything, because some things need a beat of silence before they can be spoken about without sounding like a transaction. "Where did that come from?" she asked. Owen set his cart against the wall. He looked at her with the same steadiness he always had, though something in his eyes was slightly more open than usual. Like a window that had been cracked just enough to change the air in a room. "I've had a lot of time to think," he said. "When you're doing work that doesn't take everything you have, your mind goes somewhere. Mine usually goes back to math." He said it without any attempt to make it sound profound. It was just a fact, delivered plainly. Claire looked at him for a moment. "What happened to you, Owen?" she asked. "After university, I need to understand." He was quiet for a few seconds, not evasive, just organizing. His wife had gotten sick. Ovarian cancer diagnosed 14 months after Lily was born. She died when Lily was 2. Owen had been accepted into a doctoral program by then, fully funded, applied mathematics. He deferred once for the treatment, deferred again for the funeral and the months after, the months when a man learns to be the only parent in a house built for 2. Then the deferral window closed and the program moved on without him. After that, the gap. He took what work he could find: logistics, warehousing, anything with stable hours that did not require him to stay past 3. Each time he tried to move back toward his training, the gap came up, or his age, or the market had shifted. After enough years, a person stops spending energy on doors that do not open. "I don't tell people this because I want them to feel sorry for me," he said. He was not looking for a reaction. He was just explaining the facts so that she would have them. "I made the choices I made because they were the right ones at the time. I'd make them again." Claire held his gaze. "I didn't expect to find you like this," she said. Owen looked at her. "Nobody does," he said. There was a silence. Not uncomfortable, just full. Claire waited, because she could see that he was not finished. "My daughter needed me standing," he said. That was the only calculation that mattered. I couldn't afford to fall apart, couldn't afford to sit in a room and grieve what I was supposed to become while she needed dinner and a bath and someone to read to her before bed. So I picked up the mop. And I kept picking it up. Every morning I showed up early. Every afternoon I left at 3. Every night I read her a story and made sure the lights were off and the doors were locked and the world outside could wait until tomorrow. That was the math. That was the only proof that mattered. He said it without bitterness, without resentment. He said it the way you say something that has become so deeply true that the emotion has been worn smooth by repetition, like a stone in a river. Still there, still solid, but no longer sharp. Claire left it there. But she was thinking, as she walked back to the elevator, about the doctoral program that had never happened, and the research career that had dissolved, and the mind that had been quietly, steadily running calculations in whatever margins a warehouse shift or a cleaning job allowed. Because some things do not switch off no matter what the rest of a life looks like around them. She was also thinking about what she was going to do with that. Word traveled the way things travel in office buildings. By end of day, enough people knew that a janitor had walked into a conference room full of engineers and written the solution to a 6-hour problem. Greg Dalton heard before 5. He came to Claire's office at 5:15, arms crossed, and explained that what had happened was a breach of protocol. An hourly custodial employee had engaged with proprietary system architecture without authorization. He said liability twice and precedent once. Claire listened without interrupting. When he finished, she asked one question, whether the algorithm had been fixed. Dalton said that was beside the point. Claire said it was exactly the point and that she would look into the matter. The tone meant the conversation was over. 3 days later, 2 board members contacted her. They had been briefed on the incident, framed, she suspected, as a security issue. They expressed concern about optics. The message underneath the careful language was clear: resolve the situation. Claire drafted a response, deleted it, started over. The second version was measured, strategic, but she knew it would not be enough. Owen was now the center of a problem he had not created. She was still at her desk at 8 that evening when HR forwarded Owen's resignation. Effective immediately. No grievance, no complaint, one line: he appreciated the opportunity and wished the company well. He was gone. He had decided, in his quiet way, that his presence was a problem for her and that removing himself was the cleanest solution. She walked down to the 4th floor. His cart was parked in the supply closet. His thermos, work gloves, and a small notebook had been neatly placed in a plastic bag. She stood in the hallway outside the supply closet for a long time. The building was nearly empty. The fluorescent light above the door hummed. Somewhere below her, a cleaning crew she did not know was finishing the lobby. She had lost him once, 20 years ago, through the ordinary inattention of being young and assuming that remarkable people stay visible simply because they are remarkable. Now she had lost him again. And this time she had watched it happen. She held his things the way you hold something that belongs to a person you are not ready to let go of. She brought the notebook home. Opened it the next morning. The first pages were equations, optimization problems, sequencing logic that resembled her company's own architecture. He had arrived at similar conclusions by a different road, working from his own mind, not proprietary documents. But the later pages stopped her. Shorter entries, not addressed to anyone. He wrote about his wife's last months. About the night after the funeral, when Lily crawled into his lap and fell asleep, and he sat in the dark for 4 hours because moving would have meant the day was real. He wrote about a job lost at 37, not to failure but to restructuring. About the doctoral program, not with regret, but with the clear-eyed accounting of a man trying to understand his life rather than mourn it. A piece of paper slipped out. One side, dense equations in blue ink. The other, crayon flowers, large and bright. In the corner, in uneven letters, "I love you, Daddy." Near the last page, a single line: Not everyone who takes the long way around is lost. Written for himself. Not a philosophy, just a sentence a man needed to believe. Claire closed the notebook. Then she got her coat and went to find him. He had listed a post office box on his employment paperwork. She went through the HR system herself, overriding 2 access protocols, and found an emergency contact form with a handwritten address. A building on the east side of the city. She drove there. She parked in front of a 4-story walk-up with a buzzer panel. Owen's name was on the 3rd floor, written in his clean hand. She pressed the buzzer. The door opened from the inside. Lily Carter stood in the doorway, 7 years old, with Owen's steady gaze and a seriousness older than her face. "Are you my dad's boss?" she asked. "I was," Claire said. Lily considered this. "He really loved his job," she said. Past tense. A 7-year-old using the past tense about her father's job, because she understood, in whatever way a child understands, that something had ended. Owen appeared behind his daughter. He put a hand on her shoulder and looked at Claire with the expression of a man who has closed a chapter and is now confronted with evidence that it may not be closed. "Come in," he said. The apartment was small and orderly, books stacked in columns against one wall. A legal pad on the table near the window, covered in notation. Lily's drawings on the refrigerator. 2 pairs of shoes by the door, one large, one small. Owen offered Claire the chair. He sat on the edge of the bed. Lily settled on the floor with a coloring book, close enough to touch her father's leg, which she did, periodically, without looking up. Claire set the notebook on the table between them. "The project is stalled," she said. "Webb's team hit another wall. Your solution was correct, but it was 1 layer. There are 2 more underneath it." She said it plainly. "I need you to come back." He was quiet. "I know what happened with the board. And with Dalton. I left to make it simpler for you. I know. And I'm telling you that wasn't necessary. I'm not asking you to come back as a janitor. Internal consultant. Problem-solving methodology with the engineering teams. No large title, no corner office. Same treatment as everyone else, which is something I should have enforced the first time." Owen looked at the legal pad, turned it face down. "What about the board?" "I handled the board," she said. "I explained that a janitor with no credentials had solved a critical system failure that a room full of engineers with advanced degrees couldn't crack in 6 hours. And that any company which removes the person responsible for that is not managing its assets intelligently." 2 pushed back. "I told them to find someone else who could do what you did." That ended the conversation. "And Dalton?" "No longer with the company. That was my decision. What I watched him do to you was enough." She said it without heat. "It was just a correction." Owen was quiet. Lily had stopped coloring and was listening the way children listen when they sense the adults are talking about something that matters. "The hours," Owen said. 3 o'clock. 3 o'clock. No exceptions. I'll make sure personally." "All right," he said. "Not dramatic. Just a decision, made with minimum words." Claire picked up the notebook and held it out. He took it. She told him she would address the full staff before he started. He said it was not necessary. She said it was, and it was not up for negotiation. The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile, but the shape of one. At the door, Lily looked up. "Is my dad going back?" "Yes," Claire said. Lily nodded and went back to her drawing. Claire called a full staff meeting for Monday morning. 400 people, some in chairs, some standing along the walls. She told them what had happened in plain language. She told them a janitor had walked past an open door and written down a solution that stopped a cascading system failure. She told them the company's institutional reflex to treat that as a liability had been wrong. She told them the man responsible for turning it into a disciplinary matter was gone. She did not name Dalton. She did not need to. She told them Owen Carter would return as a consultant and that she expected him to be treated with the same respect afforded to anyone else. When she finished, someone began to clap. The sound moved through the room the way sound moves when it means something. Owen started on a Wednesday. He came in through the front entrance, and Sandra, who had been leaving coffee on his utility cart every morning without a word of explanation, handed him a visitor badge and told him his room was ready on the third floor. He thanked her by name and took the elevator up. The room had been cleared over the weekend. Someone had put a whiteboard on the far wall. There was a table, 4 chairs, and a window that looked out over the street below. Owen set his notebook on the table and stood at the whiteboard for a moment, looking at it. The blank. The way you look at something that is waiting to become useful. He uncapped a marker. He wrote nothing for a moment. Then he wrote a single equation at the top of the board, not a solution, just a starting point, and stepped back and looked at it. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and took out a small piece of paper. A drawing. A star, done in yellow crayon, slightly lopsided, with 5 points of unequal length. He taped it to the corner of the whiteboard below the equation and to the right, where it would be visible every time he looked at the board but would not interfere with the work. Something in his face settled into the particular quiet of a person who is exactly where they are supposed to be, even if the road that led them there made no sense to anyone who only saw the destination. At 2:55, Owen capped his marker. He set it on the tray beneath the whiteboard, picked up his jacket, and walked to the door. In the hallway, a woman from the engineering team was passing. She saw him heading for the elevator and paused. She held the door open for him. She smiled. It was a small thing, a held door, a smile. But it was not small. It was the sound of a building learning to hold space for a man whose schedule was built around a 7-year-old girl 3 blocks away, and deciding that this was not a problem to be managed but a fact to be respected. Owen nodded his thanks. He took the elevator down, crossed the lobby, and walked out into the afternoon, where his daughter would be waiting. In his apartment on the east side of the city, behind the door, the mop still stood in the corner. He had kept it. Not as a trophy, not as a reminder of hardship, but as a marker of distance. Beside it, taped to the wall at the height a 7-year-old could reach, was a piece of paper with 3 words written in large, uneven handwriting. My dad is a hero. The mop and the note stood side by side in the quiet of the apartment. One a measure of how far he had come. The other the reason he had made the crossing at all, and together they said everything that needed to be said about Owen Carter. A man who had been given a mind that could change a field and a life that asked him to change diapers instead. Who had chosen the diapers without hesitation and without regret, and who had picked up the long way around and walked it, step by step, unhurried and exact. Not because anyone was watching, not because anyone would write about it, but because a 7-year-old girl needed her father to arrive. And he had arrived.